Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis here to wrap up the best and preview the best of Northern football. Landis had an exciting time at the Ohio State-Michigan game on Saturday, did we not?
You and Mike had a much more exciting time than I had. It sounds like.
Just detailing how it took us half an hour to get our car out of somebody's yard because we were wedged between another car and a garage. But we figured it out. We lived to tell the tale. On this show, we will preview the Pac-12 Championship game with Oregon and Washington. We'll go into some detail on that, on our focus look ahead. We'll also talk about Iowa, Michigan, and the Big Ten Championship game. We'll talk about the MAC Championship game, Toledo and Miami. We'll dig in a little bit on Mountain West, where Boise State made it to face UNLV. Landis, we are doing our own watch list. Just so people know, it's just us. It's just us watching. It's a two-man watch list. But sometimes fewer voters is better, I think. More isn't always better.
No.
There's 900 Heisman voters. There's 2 voters for the Knight of the North, but we have our 5 finalists for the best players in Northern football. And I think the way we did it is just as compelling as having 900 people fill out Heisman ballots.
Yeah, and we didn't have to go through the laborious process that happens with some awards of like, send us your 15 semifinalists, and then the next day, send us your 5. There's a lot that goes on there. We've streamlined the process.
I do want to have a major conversation about something specific about how we're going to hand out this award. So we will talk about that. We're also going to talk about our playoff predictions. We're almost there, but we're going to start with our Frantic 14, 7 topics in Northern football. There's some coaches in, some coaches out, some other things going on we want to talk about. But number one, we'll start with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh was not on the sideline for Ohio State, Michigan. He then gave news conferences on Sunday to preview the Big Ten Championship game. On Monday, he was talking with Michigan media about what happened. He was running through on Monday all the Michigan legends that he believed were created in this third straight win over Ohio State, in particular, Sherrone Moore, who he could not have more praise for with what Sherrone Moore did as the acting head coach the last 3 weeks while he's the offensive line coach, while he's the offensive coordinator. Jim Harbaugh said there wasn't a single call that Sherrone Moore made that Jim Harbaugh would have done differently. And Jim Harbaugh got asked a question to open his news conference on Monday that was like, hey, what's it going to be like to be back on the sideline? And he was like, whatever. And then he ran through basically every player that matters on the Michigan roster by name and talked about all the great things they did in the game. Offense, defense, long snapper, punter, kicker. And I thought it was like quite a magnanimous news conference of like, listen, it's not about me. Let's talk about these dudes in a real way who went out and won this thing. So I want to talk about Jim Harbaugh, but I thought like in that moment, it's like, man, this is a dude who knows his team, has handled this situation, right? Again, it's a self-created situation. But in terms of like what Michigan did on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, man, Harbaugh's got it going at Michigan. You can tell he's got a real handle on that program.
He does. And it's been evident for 3 years now. And I think winning the rivalry is what shines a light on that. Maybe that's always been the case, and the on-field results just weren't there to go along with it. But clearly he has both now. And right, like I don't want to do anything that approaches giving Michigan credit for like weathering the storm that they created. Right. But I mean, they have, right? So I don't, that probably does speak to everyone kind of being in lockstep in the program, whether you like it or not. I think that much is evident right now. And, you know, it's hard, I think, in college football anymore for coaches to be as connected as Jim Harbaugh appears to be to his entire roster. So, you know, I think that means something for him. And I think that's why they've been able to get by without him, is because they all kind of buy into what he's selling there.
I think that's a great way to say it. He is so connected to his team. And I will just say, I did have an all Big Ten ballot for all the different things you vote for. I felt like I could not vote for Jim Harbaugh for Big Ten Coach of the Year, not in a season where he was suspended twice for a total of 6 games for things that the NCAA and the Big Ten said he did that broke the rules. And so for that reason, I did not vote him in the top 3. But like, aside from those things, and I think there is a way to say aside from those things, the culture, connection, belief, right? I mean, that Michigan has got all of that nailed. right now. And in terms of like Jim Harbaugh, Michigan legend, this is one thing, and this is a much longer, probably offseason podcast, because who knows what his future is. This guy in the Big Ten, his first 6 years, his Big Ten record was 34-16, right? Which is good, but I mean, like, it's not great. And there had been the thing of like, they can't win big games, but also it wasn't like they were going 11-1 every year and just losing to Ohio State. They were losing some other games too. Last 3 years in the Big Ten, they're 26-1. And that doesn't include the 2 Big Ten title games. Like, I don't know that there's a transformation, Landis, of the view of a head coach in college football, what it was, and then what it became. Because this was not a 1, 2, 3 year thing. This was it feels like he's at the end of the rope after the COVID year. And now Michigan is an absolute dominant force in college football. That's a big change, brother. Is it not?
It is a big change. I don't know that it is viewed all that glowingly outside of Ann Arbor, because you're right that the Big Ten record has flipped in astonishing fashion.
Are we back to cheat? Are we back to science stealing?
But why did it happen? Yes.
Why did it happen?
Yeah.
I sometimes, like half the time I'm like, this is the worst thing that ever happened in college football. And then half the time I'm like, what's the thing that happened? I don't know. They're great. Like, I forget. So it is very.
Well, they're still a good team, right? I think it's not.
They're very good.
Yeah.
They are very good. And so it is confusing, but I just thought, like, yes, it's their fault they created it, but what they did on the field Saturday and then how they are going about their business. Now, they took their shots at Ohio State, and they earned the right to take those shots at Ohio State. But aside from the major cheating allegations, they just feel like they're in a great spot, don't they? Right? I don't even know how to express that. Other than the devastating violation of everything that college football and competition is about.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
They're great. Yeah.
Okay. We had to talk about Harbaugh, right? Then we have to talk they did it. And Sharon Moore coached a great game on Saturday.
He absolutely did. I was kind of expecting him not to, and he did.
So there are jobs open. Just let me ask you this very quickly. If Jim Harbaugh is not Michigan's coach next year because he goes to the NFL, should Sharon Moore be Michigan's coach?
I mean, absent of anything else that comes out of this investigation that would, otherwise make him look bad, then yeah, probably.
I mean, it's the same thing with Ryan Day. Ryan Day was the interim when Urban Meyer was suspended in 2018. Urban Meyer's done. They promote Ryan Day. Sharon Moore has been running the show. Promote him. I mean, it's a very similar situation. He certainly seems like he would be ready for it. He's been very competent, and again, striking the right balance of doing his own thing while giving Harbaugh credit for being a leader and all that kind of thing. I just think Sharon Moore, again, especially on Saturday, great job.
Yeah.
You keep him. He's not taking the Indiana job, for instance.
No.
Wait.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that. I think he's either going to come out clean enough to replace Jim Harbaugh should Jim Harbaugh leave, and if he doesn't, he'll just go with Jim Harbaugh to the NFL.
Oh, yeah. If the whole ship sinks.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about Farmageddon. This is number 2, the Iowa State, Kansas State game on Saturday night that was just ridiculous in the snow. One of the things, Landis, is like they don't have that in the South.
It looked like heavy snow too, right? It was like a thick snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't have that in the South. Do you want, given the choice, do you, Bill Landis, you loyal viewers and listeners, want to live in a world where football is sometimes played in the snow or not?
I absolutely do.
You do?
Yes.
I think everybody watching and listening to this show does. And did it make you think to yourself, man, I wouldn't mind some playoff games like that starting in the 12-team playoff? Did you think that at all watching that?
It's like the thing I'm most excited about the playoff is having to see teams that never have to play in those kind of elements potentially come up here and have to face them, which is why I get sad when I hear Northern AD say, yeah, we're going to go play in a dome somewhere. No, well, don't do that.
That was Gene Smith, the Ohio State AD, who said that, who, by the way, Ohio State's not a snow team. Ohio State's an indoor track team. So I under, like, from a competitive standpoint, do you think Ohio State's like, yes, 6 inches, slushy, heavy snow, the heavier, the better? Would they be like that?
No, I think they should be like that, but they wouldn't be like that.
Every other Northern team might be, though, right?
Yeah.
So if I think people watched it, but just to run it down again for history, number of plays in that game. So Iowa State wins. Kansas State runs 102 plays. Iowa State runs 35. Kansas State has 32 first downs. Iowa State has 10. Iowa State does not run a play in the Kansas State red zone. They run 2 plays in Kansas State territory. Iowa State's touchdowns are a 71-yard run on the first play of the game, a 77-yard run, a 79-yard pass, a 60-yard run, a 33-yard pass, and an 82-yard pass. Abu Sama, 16 carries, 276 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's a freshman from Des Moines, 5'11", 200. I'd take that guy on my team. That guy looked like a dude, didn't he?
People are just like bouncing off of him in a way that I don't think I've seen happen for a running back before. I went and checked. So Kansas State had 13 missed tackles in that game. 11 of them were against Abu Sama.
Yeah.
He was just like running through everybody.
But like this wasn't like a guy who probably is only good in the snow. That guy looked like a player.
Yeah, he's got a burst to him, which is when you can separate from people the way he was on that kind of surface and like not fall on your face and keep your traction and maintain your speed. Like, yeah, that's the kind of guy. If you did play him in a dome on turf, he would torture your team because he's so fast.
So Iowa State gets that win. Again, credit to Iowa State for a great back half of the season. And Abu Sama in the record books, it's his 276 yards. It's the 4th highest total in Iowa State history. The 3 highest are all by Troy Davis, who had consecutive 2,000-yard seasons in 1995 and 1996. And I just would like to note this because the South can cram it. In 1996, Troy Davis finished second in the Heisman voting to Danny Werfel. He won 3 of the 4 regions, but he got like no votes in the South because everybody's like, I got to give it to that old Florida QB. Spurrier's got that boy doing it. And Troy Davis is like, I've run for 5,000 yards in 2 years. And everybody in the South, I don't know where Ames is. So that's why we do this show. This show, we'll have him on. This show is for Troy Davis. Is that not, and again, by the way, it's going to happen again.
It's going to happen this year.
People in the house in the South are going to be like, Jaden Daniels 1, Jalen Milroe 2, Brock Bowers 3. Bo Nix left the South. He's dead to us.
Do we know the like breakdown of total voters by region?
Yeah, I think the Heisman does release that at the end. I think when they say like, here's the 4 regions, they say how many votes were in that region.
Okay, I want to pay attention to that this year.
I don't know who Troy Davis is. All right. So Abu Sama got that back. We want to live in a place where games like that are played. And we do. Number 3. We're going a little long, but there's a Farmageddon deserved it. Oh, last thing on Farmageddon. This is not protected in the new Big 12 schedule starting next year. They're not going to play it every year. Should they reconsider?
Yeah, of course they should.
Like, man, that was cool. It sure seemed like both fan bases liked it.
Yes, I actually didn't know that it wasn't protected. Now I'm sad. That should be played every year.
They only protected 4 Big 12 rivalries, and they're all within state. So it's like Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, BYU, TCU, Baylor, like those. So like Kansas and Iowa aren't the same state, so they said sorry.
But aren't they really?
What's that?
I said, aren't they really the same state?
I do think I think in the new landscape where you're not going to play everybody and it's harder to define success and there aren't divisions to win and stuff, I actually do think rivalries become more important. And I do think maybe the conferences will realize that as we get into this and be like, hey, what are we doing, man? Like we didn't protect Kansas State, Iowa State to make sure that like Iowa State gets to play enough games against Central Florida. We've got to make sure that Kansas State plays Cincinnati at least 6 times every 10 years. Who cares? The conferences are too big now. They're unwieldy, but the effort to get everyone to play each other like a decent amount of the time, I don't think should supersede the best rivalries. And I think it's normal for a conference. You have more than 4. So they protected 4. You have more than 4. You have more like maybe 14 that matter. So protect them all.
I'm with you.
Central Florida, if they don't get enough Ames in their lives, they'll be fine. Number 3, Jonathan Smith hired away from Oregon State to Michigan State. His first 3 years at Oregon State, Jonathan Smith was 9-22. The last 3, he's 25-13. He is a walk-on who became a 2-time captain and starting quarterback at Oregon State. He is Oregon State's all-time leader in passing yards and passing touchdowns. He is like a legend as a player. Here's where he worked as a coach before he took the Oregon State head job. He was a GA at Oregon State, then Idaho, Montana, Boise State, Washington, which is like that is the Northwest Big Four. And then you go to Oregon State, and he left it all. And when he left it all, he said, I kind of knew this was going to happen. And so it makes me sad for Oregon State. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a better hire than I thought Michigan State would be able to make, frankly. But it feels like a gut punch for Oregon State, because in an ideal world where they have the necessary resources and the Pac-12 doesn't die, you would hope Jonathan Smith is the head coach of Oregon State for 50 years.
He wouldn't have left, right? If Oregon State was still in the Pac-12, I don't think he would have done this.
Tell the way he said it, like he said, like I knew this was going to happen or something like that, to paraphrase. I don't know if that meant as my conference exploded beneath me this year, or if he's known this for 2 or 3 years, because it's a tough spot. It's a great Northern move. Thank goodness a Northern program got Jonathan Smith. But I feel terrible for Oregon State.
I do feel bad for Oregon State, but I simultaneously feel very good for Michigan State fans, because the last couple of years have been rough, this year especially, and I wasn't confident that they were going to get this right, because the last coaching search felt a little weird. This is very solid. Like, I think this is a tremendous hire. I think Jonathan Smith plays a brand of football and will recruit to a brand of football that will work quite well in the Big Ten.
And I remain so impressed by them getting Aiden Childs as a quarterback recruit out of Los Angeles. It makes me think that he can get a quarterback to go to East Lansing. Maybe not from Los Angeles, but go get somebody to go play there. And that at times has held them back. So good luck to Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. As we record this on Tuesday morning, I think his intro news conference is on Tuesday. So this is a thing we'll be talking about more in the offseason. We'll get him on. We'll get him on the show.
He's bringing his O-line coach, right? Jim Mahalchik. Who's
awesome.
Yeah, he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. He might be now like one of the top 5 assistant coaches in the Big Ten.
Okay. Number 4, Tom Allen out at Indiana. We've talked about it all year. We weren't sure Indiana would do it. The buyout was $20 million plus. If they did it after this season, it would have gone down, been cut in half if they had given him one more year. As it turns out, they work it out. They're going to pay him about $15 million instead of the full 20. That's still a pretty penny for Indiana to get out of this. The fact that Indiana did not let the money hold them back for a guy that everybody knew was no longer the right guy for Indiana, is that good or is it bad? Because this is like the 5th grade version of, right? Texas A&M is the varsity who's just setting money on fire. But 75, this is an SAT question. $75 million to Texas A&M is $15 million to Indiana, is it not?
Yeah, I think it's a similar idea. It's still $15 million. I think it's still one of the largest buyouts ever. Like, it's within the top 8, I think, of the largest buyouts ever. It might be the same number that Dana Holgerson is getting from Houston now that he's out too. And we'll talk about that in a second. But it is a steep price to pay for a program like Indiana, and I guess it's fair to question whether or not it's worth it. It's like, what are you paying for? You're paying $15 million for the privilege of maybe going to a bowl game. The logic there maybe doesn't line up for some people, but I am happy for Indiana fans, I think, because that program, it probably was already into the stage where there was just total apathy towards it. Like the senior day crowd they had there was a joke, and just nobody cared, and it wasn't going to get any better. So, $15 million to reinvigorate your fan base and inject a little bit of hope into your program maybe isn't the worst thing in the world.
And, everybody points to the COVID year when they went 6-2. They were in the top 10. He got the contract extension, a 7-year contract extension right after the COVID year. So that 6-2 is certainly an outlier in 2020. But I think this is important. The 3 years before, his first 3 years before the COVID year, 5-7, 5-7, 8-5. That's an 18-19 record. The 3 seasons since the COVID year, 2-10, 4-8, 3-9. That's 9-27. So this 3-year stretch, they won half as many games as the pre-COVID 3-year stretch. I actually think that's the bigger deal.
Yep.
It's not that they expected to be a top 25 team that they were in the COVID year, but it's that they went from fighting for bowl contention, right, having a winning year in there, to just stinking, to just being hopeless, to being the worst football program in the Big Ten. The thing, and this is a difficult thing, and I think Oregon State and Indiana are related in this new world of what you want to be, what you try to be in the NIL world, all these things. Tom Allen gave a statement after he was fired It was a shock to the conscience of those who support Indiana football. He was talking about the changes in college football. He means NIL. The arrival of NIL, he called a shock to the conscience. The time has come to fully embrace this chapter, and I pray that Indiana does just that. So he's saying, I couldn't compete because we weren't invested in NIL. I hope Indiana gets more invested the next time around. I don't know that's the solution for every program in the country that's between the 50th best and 80th best program is to tell their fans they have to spend more money on players. I think there might be some acceptance of what you are that has to come with that.
Sure.
But then the difficult thing is, I think Oregon State and Indiana would both fit into that. Oregon State, they're great, but they're not competing in that way, so the good guy leaves. Indiana, they're terrible, and the guy who gets fired says, the reason I'm bad is because we can't compete. I do acknowledge, do we not acknowledge that it is a difficult time for programs like that to figure out what to do?
Yeah, yes. I think all of them kind of have to go back to the drawing board on how they built their rosters, because it's not even necessarily reassessing the kind of people you recruit. It's having a plan for when those players become too good and then they leave your team, and then what you do from there. And yeah, I fully acknowledge that it's difficult. I think coaches seem to fall back on this a lot, right? And I do think there's a little bit of a boogeyman element to it that I don't buy 100%, but there's absolutely truth to it. I guess my comeback to Tom Allen would be like, NIL didn't make you hire Walt Bell. You know what I mean? Like you still had to you had to put whatever your roster was in the best position to succeed, and he didn't do that.
Walt Bell, the offensive coordinator, he was fired earlier this season. All right, number 5 is West Virginia's revenge. West Virginia, we've been talking about Neal Brown in West Virginia all year. 8-4, brother. That's a great year. Yep. West Virginia was picked last, dead last in the Big 12, behind all the new teams. They were like, oh, BYU and Houston and UCF and Cincinnati, they've never done this before, but they're definitely better than West Virginia. They end up tied for 4th. They go 6-3. They're tied for 4th in the Big 12. They weren't even close. They were so far behind Cincinnati for the 13th pick in the preseason poll. And at the same time, there been all these comparisons. You mentioned Dana Holgorsen fired at Houston. Dana Holgorsen had left West Virginia to go to Houston, which was not a Power 5 program at that time. It was a Power 5 program this year in the Big 12. Neal Brown at West Virginia in 5 years is now 30-29. But they're on the upswing, 30-29. Dana Holgorsen at Houston was 31-28, and he got canned. So in 2021, Houston was 12-2, and West Virginia was 6-7. And now 2 seasons later, Neal Brown's got it cooking, and Dana Holgorsen's out of a job.
Which has to just be tremendous for West Virginia fans, and I would bathe myself in it if I were you. The one thing that stings is you could have also beat them while this happened, and they lost to Houston in a crazy ending. But I hope that doesn't take any of the shine off of it. You should celebrate the fact that the guy who left you, because I don't know why he left, maybe because he thought, I think he left because West Virginia wasn't going to pay him the money he thought he deserved, and then the program did pay him. Someone else on the program did pay him that money, and now they're firing him. So West Virginia, you were right. Congratulations.
$14.8 million buyout for Dana Holgorsen at Houston, but they have that rich guy who owns the Rockets who just throws money around.
Yeah, they got for Titas. You think Neal Brown's going to be Big 12 Coach of the Year?
I don't know. Sark, you going to give it to Sark if they they make the playoff?
Yeah, I mean, probably, but he was picked to finish 4th. Is it the same people who picked him to finish 14th that get to pick the Coach of the Year? Because if that's the case, they should right the wrong and make him Coach of the Year.
So great year for West Virginia. Congratulations to them. My flag plant. We like to do that here at the end of the Frantic 14, which is more like the Frantic 25 today. But this stuff is interesting, I think. So as I said, I had a Big Ten Big Ten ballot, which included picking the Coach of the Year. And as I was going through, I was like, there is nobody to pick. So I voted David Braun of Northwestern first. I voted Harlan Barnett of Michigan State third for just holding it together in an impossible situation. I said I felt like I could not vote for Jim Harbaugh because of the off-field things, and he missed half his team's games. You know who I voted second?
Kirk Ferentz.
Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah.
You had to, because I realized there were 14 teams in the Big Ten this year, and only 4 had seasons I think they were happy with. So that is 12-0 Michigan, right? Michigan against the world. That is 10-2 Iowa, miracle. 7-5 Northwestern. I think people thought they might go 1-11. And then I wasn't sure on this, but I think Rutgers making a bowl, 6-6 Rutgers, that qualifies. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you agree that nobody else is happy? 11-1 Ohio State, are they happy?
No.
10-2 Penn State, are they happy?
Nope.
7-5 Maryland that started 5-0, are they happy?
No.
7-5 Wisconsin, are they happy?
No. They're probably happy they didn't crater on them, but no, not that is below what they expected this year.
5-7 Nebraska, 5-7 Illinois, 5-7 Minnesota. Are they happy?
No.
4-8 Purdue, 4-8 Michigan State. Are they happy?
No.
Indiana 3-9 fired their coach. Not a great year.
Mm-mm.
Like nobody, because, and one of the things, like there weren't enough horrible teams for more teams to have success, right? When everybody in the Big Ten West is 5-7, it's like, is anybody feeling good about this? So just an odd year in the Big Ten, I think, right?
Yes. Sorry, I was looking at a message on my watch. Was distracted. Yeah. I think it's I think in this case parity was not necessarily a good thing for the Big Ten West.
I mean, in a world where maybe you would think, I don't know, maybe 7 programs should be happy and 7 programs shouldn't, right? But like I think it's more like 4-10. All right, what's your flag plan?
So this has changed a little bit on me since I told Mike I wanted to talk about it. I was going to make a plea to Syracuse to like not bungle their coaching search, because some of the names I had seen out there, like Dan Mullen and Al Golden, the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, Jason Candle, the head coach at Toledo, like none of them were doing much for me. And it just felt like trying to grab like an obvious name and maybe not necessarily somebody who would end up doing a good job at Syracuse, because it's an incredibly difficult job. I don't think you can hire someone who has never really had to operate at a place where they've had less resources than everybody around them. And that's what this Syracuse job is. It does seem now, though, as we're talking about this on Tuesday morning, that they have pivoted off of those names that I mentioned. Bob Chesney, the Holy Cross coach, was a name that was thrown out there. That one was intriguing to me, but now it does seem like they've come around to the idea of Fran Brown, who's a defensive backs coach at Georgia, who is like a tried and true East Coast guy. He's from New Jersey, spent the majority of his career at Rutgers and Temple, has the proper recruiting connections I think you need for this job. No guarantee that gets you anywhere, but I think he knows the places he has to go to get players that could potentially be interested in going to Syracuse. And now he's been at Georgia long enough that he's going to have at least one national championship ring. He might have 2 by the time this year is over. And I think that can give you a little bit of cachet too. So if that's the direction the Syracuse goes, I'm good with that. But I was nervous for a while that they were going to do something that maybe they felt lended credibility to their program by just like hiring a name that people knew, but I don't think actually would have gotten them any better results than they've already had over the last few years. So I guess it's less of a plea now and more of a kudos to Syracuse if this is the direction they're going.
And that stuff matters, man. But I agree. This feels like they've zeroed in on a guy who has a chance to do something there. All right, time to talk about playoff stuff, preview games, best Northern players. We'll do all of that next on Kings of the North. All right, time to talk playoff. Pretty interesting weekend. I think this has been a good playoff race for college football. I know a lot of people have made note of the fact that I think there's only one upset of like a highly ranked team. Normally there's multiple of those. So there was a lot of, the Jordan Travis injury at Florida State's a big deal, but in terms of like results on the field, a lot of chalk this year. So let's get to Landis, what you think it's going to be a week from now after conference championship weekend. Who are your playoff teams? Yeah.
So some changes for me following Michigan's win over Ohio State. So I have Georgia number 1 still. I've been consistent there. I now have Michigan at number 2. Oregon at 3, who I'm projecting to beat Washington in the Pac-12 Championship and be a 1-loss Pac-12 champion. And then I have Texas at 4. Texas in this projection is a 1-loss Big 12 champ, beating Oklahoma State. And it's hard for me. Like Florida State could very well beat Louisville, and if they do, I think they would get in over Texas. I didn't think Florida State looked tremendous without Jordan Travis against Florida. How good is Louisville actually? Can they really pull it off? I don't know. It's like a 2.5 point spread, I think, in that game. So Vegas thinks it's going to be a close game. And I'm just leaning toward Florida State not being able to cap off the unbeaten season without Jordan Travis, which is an unfortunate break for them, but that allows Texas to get in here as the 4 seed.
So to be clear, this is not any kind of belief that a 13-0 Florida State team could be left out of the playoff because they're starting quarterbacks out for the year.
No, I think I maybe mentioned that last week as a possibility. The more I've thought about it, I don't think they would do that, and maybe they would want to, but I don't think they would.
I think it'd be a terrible precedent.
Yeah.
And in the last year where it's a possibility, right? Because in the 12-team playoff, no undefeated teams getting left out. So,
right.
It's a lot of like fair assumptions probably, but there's still assumptions. Like we assume you're not going to be good enough anymore, even though you're undefeated. So I was curious with your pick. The rest of it makes sense. This is leaving out 12-1 Washington, which loses to Oregon. It's leaving out 11-1 Ohio State as a non-champ. Bama takes a second loss to Georgia. Other than the Florida State thing, not a lot of controversy there because I do right. If Florida State loses to Louisville, they're not the champ. So then 12-1 loss Big 12 champ Texas would definitely be ahead of 1 loss non-champ Florida State. And Louisville took a second loss to Kentucky last week. So 2-loss ACC champ Louisville's not getting in.
Yeah. Is there, I guess to go back to the point we were just talking about, is there any chance, is there a non-zero chance, I guess, in your mind that Texas blows the doors off of Oklahoma State and Florida State wins, but it wins ugly because it doesn't have its quarterback, and Texas can still get in over them? Or do you think 13-0 is 13-0 no matter what it looks like? Florida State's getting in.
If I were on the committee, I would stand up in the room and say, what are we doing? How a team won all of its games and we're just I would be very against that because I do believe a little bit more in the deserve versus what would the Vegas line be on a neutral field argument of things. Because if that's what your argument is, then why aren't you arguing for a 3-loss team to be in if the results don't matter, if the results aren't the first thing? And I just think anybody, like what they would actually do, I just don't think it's worth it to do it. They'd take a raft of stuff. I think it would hurt the sport in a lot of ways in a world where it's not going to be an issue ever again. So, and Texas beat Alabama, but also it's like, well, Texas, there's still a little bit of an assumption of if you lose once, it's out of your hands. And so Texas lost to Oklahoma, and if they had won all their games, just like Florida State did, there wouldn't be an issue because Texas's resume would be better, but they didn't. So I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah,
do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Yeah, I don't know that there's an explanation that I would find acceptable to leave a 13-0 Florida State team out.
Yeah,
even if they could win 7-0 for all I care, like they deserve it.
And it's not the same as leaving out like undefeated UCF. It's just not, because Florida State did beat LSU, and Florida State, Florida State did beat LSU. They did beat Clemson. They would have beaten Louisville. They beat everybody in their conference, in a Power 5 conference. Like I think they would have proven it, even though this terrible, terrible thing happened. All right, so mine is completely opposite of yours. We only have one of the 4 teams the same, which is pretty crazy to be at that spot going into the last weekend. I have Michigan 1, Alabama 2, Washington 3, Florida State 4. So this for me is 3 undefeated teams in Michigan, Washington, and Florida State, and then 1 loss Bama who beats Georgia in the SEC title game. I guess my controversy here is, do you believe that 1 loss Georgia would get in ahead of Florida State in this scenario, Landis? Because you're talking about, Georgia, which has just beaten some ranked teams here at the end of the year. They're the 2-time defending national champ. They've been looking good. Say they lose a close game to Bama and Florida State skates by. Is this the scenario that you could leave out the Seminoles?
I think if I'm Florida State, I would be made more nervous by that scenario than I would the Texas scenario. I still wouldn't agree with it, but I could see it happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's where how I would argue this too. I do think it's not wrong to call some of these conference championship games quarterfinals, and it's just like, hey, you got a tough draw, but you lost. Like you got to, right? Because there's still going to be a world where this Alabama team, for instance, or either team, there's going to be a world where the second team in the SEC cannot have a first-round bye, right? Because it has to be the 4 conference champs. And so that second best team in the SEC is probably going to be the 5 seed, maybe the 6 seed, whatever. But there's going to be a world where like that 4 seed or maybe even a 3 seed against a 6, it's going to be like, oh man, you got a tough draw. So it doesn't always happen that when you make the draw, the best team plays the 8th best team. Right? Sometimes it's by the record, but it's not really what those teams are. So I would just consider this a bad draw. But you lost your quarterfinal and you're out. So that's how I would argue that you have the opportunity to win. We understand that maybe Alabama and Georgia are 2 of the 3 best teams, but you were in a playoff scenario already. And in a world where we're getting our minds ready for a 12-team playoff, I think that's a compelling argument.
Yeah, I think I would hear that. Yeah, for sure. You probably get some pushback from people in Athens, but I do think that's probably.
Of course, the draw is tough. Yeah. It's in the SEC.
You have to argue in your Stetson Bennett voice on behalf of the Bulldogs.
How dare! No, I have been hired by Florida State because I am on retainer and the highest bidder wins. The Georgia Bulldogs do not. I can't do it. I can't go against the dogs. The dog mentality still lives in Stetson Bennett. I'm giving my money back to Florida State. Go Dogs. That's how that would go.
What your view on Alabama beating Georgia, has that been consistent? Have you considered rethinking that?
It's been consistent, and it's been like this. Getting reconsidered bit by bit by bit by bit as Georgia. I mean, like middle of the year, I was like, Georgia stinks. And now I'm like, okay, Georgia doesn't stink. I know that. But it's like a Saban, Jalen Milroe argument. It's like they've got that guy who is pretty tired of Georgia taking over his conference.
Yeah.
And then Jalen Milroe is an unbelievable playmaker. He's unbelievable. Is he not? Throwing and running.
He's incredible. Yeah.
And
did you hear what Kirby Smart said about Jalen Milroe this week?
Compared him to Lamar Jackson, right?
He compared him to like the video game version of Lamar Jackson in Madden, which is like impossible to stop.
So like that. Even a world where it feels like Georgia's like the better team or whatever, but like Saban's got a little something saved up, and then Jalen Milroe's like, well, we can't stop him. So, which by the way, might win Jalen Milroe the Heisman. It might.
He's not out of it, I don't think. Yeah. Also, it could be Saban's last rodeo too, right? Does that factor into
what? Is Saban retiring? What are you?
No, but I mean, he's of the age where I think we're going to wonder that at the end of every season.
Are we like the Joe Paterno thing?
Yeah.
I've said this. Like we just reached a point with Joe Paterno where every Big Ten media days was like, "Why aren't you retired yet? How are you still alive?" And he was like, "Can I just coach? What are you doing? Can you just let me coach?" So I think we'll be at that point with Nick Saban. Yeah. I don't know. I certainly think Bama has a chance. Do you think Bama has a chance?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a chance. Yeah. So okay, it's gonna be a good weekend for that stuff. But we're in the North. We don't have to pay attention to anything. We'll look at the scores in the newspaper in the morning, Sunday morning. We'll be like, oh, what's how about that? Alabama won. Wasn't aware. Was really just focused on the MAC championship game. Was really zeroed in on whether Boise State could get it done. So congratulations to Nick Saban, huh? Let's read the box score. Oh, Jalen Milroe threw for 411 yards. What do you know? All right. When we come back, we're handing out finalist positions. 5 players we have decided are the finalists for the Night of the North Award. We'll unveil that after this. Big unveiling now of the 5 finalists for the Night of the North Award. This is the Northern Heisman. We're going to hand this out every year. This is the first one that's going to be handed out. It's being handed out now by what Landis and I say. I think down the road, we would like to have voters. We would like to have it be a little more of a process. We'd like to have it be a thing, right? Mm-hmm. They hand out the Earl Campbell Texas Award for like the best player from Texas. There's things that we're not pretending, Landis, that this is eventually going to be quite at the Heisman level.
No, not close, but not.
But at the tier below that, which is everything else.
That's right. Yeah, And they get people to go to Tyler, Texas for the Eric Campbell Award. We can certainly get them to come to Medieval Times in New Jersey to get the Knight of the North Award. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait. We still got, do you have a number for the Medieval Times corporate headquarters? We'll get that.
I'll find it. Yeah.
Where are you on Knight of the North? Is that the best name for this for sure?
If I'm being honest, I liked King of the North.
I kind of like King of the North too. So yeah, we'll work it out. I mean, sometimes when things are started, like you change the name, but we understand what it is, which is the best football player for a Northern football team. We are characterizing that right now as our 28 teams, which is 14 from the Big Ten and another 14 not in the Big Ten. We may add teams for next year. We've talked about that. Will we add Missouri? Will we add Kansas or Kansas State? Will we add Virginia Tech? Will we add Louisville? Right? So then if you're in, you're eligible. But we have, from those 28 teams, we have chosen 5 guys that we now have as the finalists. Actually, let's talk about this now. I really want to make a push. Like, I want to put pressure on the Heisman to move the Heisman to after the entire season starting next year, because I think a world where they hand out the Heisman and then teams play potentially 4 more games in the playoff is crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the 2 choices have to be you move the Heisman back and take everything into consideration, or we really truly acknowledge is that the Heisman is a regular season award. And then somebody, and maybe it'll be us, comes up with a postseason college football award that also has great value and prestige. And this is only the guys who are playing for one of the 12 playoff teams are eligible, and it is based on your value and performance in the playoff. I would be okay with that also. But to me, the idea of, well, the Heisman's the Heisman, that's the thing that matters, but we hand it out. And then, because in college football, all those stats count for the regular season. There's not as much of a distinction as there is with professional sports, unless they start a distinction where they don't count your, like they've got to figure something out, because right now, in some ways it's smushed together, but with the Heisman, it's not smushed together. So I think I want us for now to hand our award out after the playoff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I want to too. Especially because we're going to have a couple, well, I guess maybe only one of our finalists ends up playing in it, but I think we should do that. Yes. I think that's a proper way to do it, because we don't have, I'm trying to think like across other sports, right? Hockey does it. Hockey has the Hart Trophy for regular season MVP and then the Conn Smythe Trophy for the playoff MVP. But I don't know that a lot of other sports do that, right? Like there are championship series MVPs, but not like a total postseason MVP award.
So like college football has to get this figured out. I think moving the Heisman makes the most sense. And like people say, well, if you move that, because I had this argument on my last show where I went bonkers with my former co-host Shahan on the College Football Survivor show, and it was the most like I ever yelled at him, and he was like, "Oh, this is what yelling at guys Doug is like," because I was so staunch on they've got to move the Heisman. And he was like, well, then it'll just always go to somebody on a playoff team. But as it is right now, conference championship weekend is incredibly important. It almost right now already goes only to somebody who plays conference championship weekend. So like we're willing to make that distinction, that there are some guys in the mix who get an extra game on the biggest stage, and there are some guys who don't, but we're not willing to make that distinction for the playoff. That's insane to me.
Yeah, I agree. That does. I'm with you. You don't have to yell at me. We're on the same team here. Does any part of
Landis? Oh, come on.
Does that? I don't think this is any part of your motivation for doing this. But do you think moving the Heisman to the end of the season could have an impact on guys deciding to play in like bowl games and stuff when they otherwise wouldn't?
I think making things matter is a motivation. Yeah. And so if you're in the Heisman mix, but you're not in the playoff, but you decide, well, I kind of want to win the Heisman, I better go throw for 450 yards in the guaranteed rate bowl. Yeah. And I'm not saying you're ineligible if you opt out, but I'm saying you're giving up your last chance to make a case, and that's your decision. And so a year ago, it was like, well, if you had waited, what if Stetson Bennett would have won the Heisman? And it's like, is that any worse than Caleb Williams winning the Heisman? Did you see what Caleb Williams did this year? Caleb Williams' team lost his bowl game. Like, what? Why are we offended that Stetson Bennett would have won the Heisman over Caleb Williams if we had waited until after the playoff last year? What's wrong about that?
It's better process, right? I don't. It's almost like it's forcing Heisman voters to pay more attention to college football, which I'm in favor of.
And with 12 teams in the playoff instead of 4, there's more good guys on good teams who will get a shot. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do this after it's all over. But for now, we're announcing. So I guess we are announcing by announcing finalists, though, if you're not a finalist, it doesn't matter what you do in the playoff, you can't win. By our rules that
we just made up. This
is not one of those watch lists where when we vote on awards, it's always like, here are the 10 finalists, or just write somebody in. It always says that.
Yeah.
We're not just going to write somebody in. I also think that's not a bad way to do it. That if the Heisman said, here are 5 finalists, now one of these 5 is going to go win. You could do that now. So then it's not only based on the playoff. That it's like, well, you went nuts in the playoff, but your regular season did not put you in one of the 5 finalists, so you can't win. Actually, we just solved it. Isn't that a good solution? That
is a good solution. And the Heisman's weird. Like you said, like every award gives you an option to write somebody in, but they also give you a list of like the guys you should be considering. The Heisman does not do that. The Heisman says, here's 3 spots, write 3 names.
You could follow the process as it is right now, where you announce the 5 Heisman finalists and I make it 5, and you could have those 5 guys go to New York now if you wanted to, or you could just announce the 5 now and then have all 5 go at the end of the year. Okay, we're going to solve this for them. They are old and stodgy, and I'm already fighting with them because they have a person in charge of picking the voters in Ohio who has not covered college football as his primary job in like 10 years. And I yelled at them about that, and they were just like, thanks, Doug. And I was like, sorry for trying to make your process better, Heisman. So the result of this may be that they take my vote away because I'm so cranky about this. But maybe the result is that I change the Heisman for the better. Yeah. I actually probably would bet on take my vote away.
They can't take your vote away for the Knight/King of the North, though.
That is right, which is what we're talking about. That's right. Oh, you can take my vote away? We made our own award. We're going to hire Stetson Bennett, college football lawyer, on our behalf to like sue the Heisman on behalf of the Knight of the North. All right. Number 1 finalist for Knight of the North is Joe Alt, Notre Dame left tackle. He's the highest graded offensive lineman, not just offensive tackle, in all of the Power 5. He's given up 1 sack the whole year. He's a 3-year starter. He is the best offensive lineman in college football, Landis, yes or no?
I think so. Yeah, there are other guys in the conversation. I suppose quite a few of them in the North, right? We have a lot of good offensive linemen on our teams here, but I think he's clearly the best. And he also he came into the season with a lot of hype and people wanting to see him perform like the best offensive lineman in the country. And I think he more than lived up to it. Like sometimes you put that on a player, they come into the season, it doesn't quite live up to expectations. He certainly has. I know Notre Dame's season has not gone the way that certainly they hoped it would, and maybe some others thought that it would, but I think Joe Alt has played like an All-American, best left tackle, best offensive lineman in college football all season.
And we want our award to be like this. We want to bring in non-skill players to the discussion in a way that the Heisman rarely does, especially when it comes to offensive line, right? Orlando Pace, yes, but like very rarely beyond that. And that we're really trying to acknowledge like the best, most impactful, most valuable football player. It doesn't have to be a quarterback.
No, it doesn't have to. I think it's hard, right? It's hard to discern who is like the best offensive lineman and then like try to compare him to a skill player. I understand that, there are stats and then there are your eyes and it's hard to match the two up sometimes, but we will always give not reserve a spot for an offensive lineman. I don't think that's what we're trying to do, but we are going to keep an open mind when we do this because offensive linemen deserve to be considered for awards like this far more often than they are.
All right. That's 1 of 5 finalists. Finalist number 2 is Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback from Washington, second in the nation in passing yards with 3,899, 32 touchdown passes. That's 4th. And this certainly matters. Led Washington to its first undefeated regular season since 1991. I am always very much of the idea that how your team does matters for this, right? That your excellence created something bigger. It doesn't mean that somebody from a 7-5 team can't be in our mix here. But if Washington was 10-2, I don't know if Penix would be here, because he started off like statistically in a spectacular fashion, and the second half of the year has kind of trailed off a bit, but Washington's still winning.
Yeah, and I think if you watch those games, even if Michael Penix is not playing quite to the same level he was earlier in the year, he's still finding ways to help Washington win these games. Like he's run the ball a little bit in a couple other big games. If he's not been deadly accurate for the entirety of a game, he's managed to make a handful of big throws that swing the game in Washington's favor. So yeah, I'm with you. Like the statistical output is still pretty gaudy and catches your attention. But if you watch the way the Washington season has played out, there's a little bit of a gamer element to Michael Penix too that I think has emerged here on the back half of the season that I would take into consideration when we're trying to figure out who deserves an award like this.
They wouldn't be where they are without him.
No.
He's the driving force of what they do. They have a lot of excellent skill players. They have some great defensive players, but Michael Penix has made it happen. So I think he absolutely deserves to be one of the 5 finalists here. All right, number 3. I do think I agree. King of the North. Probably going to change it. We're going to change it. Number 3 is Jerzon Newton of Illinois. And again, this is what we want to do here when it's deserved. He's a defensive tackle, 7.5 sacks and 44 pressures, according to PFF. That leads all Power 5 defensive tackles. And it's just a little different world for an edge rusher versus a defensive tackle. He does not come off the field. He has played 100 more snaps than any other defensive tackle in the North, which that's like 10 snaps a game more that he is just out there. This is a position, Landis, where a lot of teams rotate, right? It's hard to play defensive tackle. This guy is a beast. He's also blocked 4 kicks. So, he is a game wrecker, and I think consistency and ceiling, this dude is rare.
He is rare. And the sheer number, like the workload is astonishing for this position, because he's a big guy at defensive tackle. The motor is incredible. Like when a guy plays as much as Johnny Newton has played, you expect the play to like taper off at some point, and that really hasn't happened. And Illinois did not have the best season, but if you go through and watch some of their key games, he no doubt took over. And even maybe their most heartbreaking loss of the season was the game that they lost to Wisconsin, when Wisconsin, I think, scored like 21 or so straight points to win that game. All of that happened after Johnny Newton got ejected. Like he was controlling that game, I think, for Illinois. And then you pull him out of there, and all of a sudden they can't handle Wisconsin and end up losing a game that kind of doesn't derail their season. But they're left a little disappointed here because they didn't get a win in that particular game. And that's the kind of difference.
They're not going to a bowl,
right? Yeah, that's the kind of difference that a guy like this makes. So maybe less obvious to people around the country. I think not to people who pay attention to Northern football. They know this guy's a force, so I think he had to be here.
And we've certainly, with what Georgia has done with defensive tackles lately, right, from Jordan Davis to Jalen Carter to Devontae Wyatt, like people understand how impactful they are. But again, in 21, when Georgia was trying to find its Heisman candidate, and they were sort of presenting Jordan Davis as their Heisman candidate, he played like 350 snaps that year. Johnny Newton's played 700. He plays twice as much. And that doesn't mean like, oh, he compiles more stats. It means like he plays at that level twice as often. I thought that was a really tough thing about the Jordan Davis case. It's like, man, he's not even on the field half the time, because that's the norm at defensive tackle, because it's such a grueling position. This guy is outside the norm, which is why I think he certainly deserves to be one of the 5 finalists. All right, finalist number 4 is Bo Nix. Oregon quarterback, leads the nation in passing yards, 3,906, 37 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, 37 touchdowns a second, 70.8% completion percentage, which is best in the nation, Landis. Again, driving force. And I think he's played better in the second half of the year, when Michael Penix has maybe played better in the first half of the year. He's obvious he's got to be in here.
Yeah, I want to compare that a little bit when we talk later on about the Pac-12 Championship, but it's clear that Bo Nix I think has played like Jaden Daniels is absurd. So maybe he is the guy. But in terms of playing meaningful games, I think Bo Nix has been the best quarterback in college football over the second half of the season. And it's also a cool story, right? He goes to Auburn as like a 5-star guy who people thought was going to be the savior of that program. He's a legacy there. It doesn't quite work out. Transfers, and I think when he transferred to Oregon, people kind of thought he was a bust. And Had a really good first season at Oregon, and then has elevated even more this year, playing for one of the better teams in college football. So absolutely, like, slam dunk had to be on this list, and I would probably say at the moment he's the favorite.
Number 5, Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. 9th in the nation in receiving yards with 1,211. Tied for 2nd in the nation with 14 receiving touchdowns. That's tied for 1st in the North. He's had 8 games, Landis, of 100 receiving yards or more. That includes against Michigan on Saturday. Ohio State, the last 3 seasons, has entered the Michigan game with the player with a fairly compelling case for any national award. And then they've lost to Michigan. And that absolutely is a factor, but I didn't think it was enough of a factor for Marvin Harrison Jr. to not make our top 5.
No, I don't think so either. And we'll talk about some guys who were like just missing the cut here, but one of them was Rome Odunze, right, the receiver at Washington. And there's probably a compelling case to make between he and Marvin in terms of, like, if you say, like, okay, we have a spot for one receiver on this list, who's going to get it? Like, I'd hear you out, but I think Marvin, similar to Michael Penix, has, like, sort of been the driver behind a lot of Ohio State's success this season. And I know they came up short, but to get as much attention as he does, and for everyone in the world to know that kind of Ohio State's offense goes as he goes, and then to still be as productive as he was this season, made me totally comfortable with Marvin being here. I think even though they didn't get the job done against Michigan, he played well, and he deserves to be here.
Ohio State had been mounting a Heisman case for Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not going to win in a world where they didn't beat Michigan and Ohio State's not playing on championship weekend. Do you think he gets to New York?
So they can send up to 5, right?
Yeah. I think it is just 5 now. I think they said a couple years ago it's always going to be 5.
Yeah, I could see it. If it's like Nix and Penix and Jaden Daniels.
I think it depends what Milroe does in the SEC championship game.
Carson Beck is going to get consideration too if he plays well. Yeah. So maybe it's like one of the quarterbacks from the SEC championship and then like a 5th spot. I could see that being Marvin.
I think it's possible. Yeah. Okay, so those are our 5 finalists for the best Northern football player. Joe Alt, the offensive tackle from Notre Dame. 2 Pac-12 quarterbacks, Michael Penix Jr. at Washington, Bo Nix at Oregon. Jerzon Newton, the defensive tackle at Illinois, and Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. Landis, who were the guys that were like right there? Because I think we would have been willing to go to a 6th finalist. I think more than 6 is unwieldy. Who just missed it?
Yeah, Rome Odunze, the receiver from Washington, who I just mentioned, was certainly in strong consideration. I think Damian Martinez, the running back at Oregon State, who we like a lot. We've talked a lot about throughout this season. We've had him on the in-season list quite a few times. Just a really productive player, and again, a guy who is behind a lot of the success for an Oregon State team that had a good season. Cooper DeJean, the defensive back, cornerback, special teams ace from Iowa, who we like mid-season, I think, came around and was like, okay, we got to keep this guy at the front of mind when we're thinking about this. And then he unfortunately got hurt, and Iowa kind of just kept winning despite that. So if we had a list that was out to 10, like Cooper DeJean, I think would no doubt be on it. But the injury played a factor there as well. And then Jonah Ellis, the pass rusher from Utah, who I believe still leads the North in sacks and is among the national leaders in sacks and pressures, had a really productive season for an excellent Utah defense, but he also got hurt at the end of the season. So that hurt his chances as well.
Yeah, I think a healthy Ellis or a healthy DeJean might have been the 6th guy here. JJ McCarthy at Michigan. Michigan's a little bit in the Georgia spot of like, hey, you're a great team, but like, who's your awards guy? Right? Last year, it clearly was Blake Corum, and then he got hurt at the end of the year, and that kept him, I think, from being a Heisman finalist. I would have loved to acknowledge Michigan by putting one of the Wolverines in our finalist list, but who should it have been? Like, who is Michigan's best player?
Yeah, they just have a lot of really good ones. There's no one who jumps out. It's like you could pick like one of the like Chris Jenkins or Mason Graham maybe, or like Mike Sainer still. I don't know. They're kind of nickel safety guy. Do you pick like Zach Zinter, their guard who got hurt against Ohio State, and I'm assuming is out for the rest of the year based on how nasty that looked? Like I don't know. Like I don't think JJ's play has like risen to the level of the other guys we've talked about here. And sheer production for really anyone on Michigan's roster hasn't either. It feels weird to not have a Michigan representative, but I guess it's a testament to Michigan that they kind of get the job done with the whole rather than a couple of individuals leading the way.
And again, Georgia's been in the same spot. One of the more complicated things about the Heisman race the past couple of years is that Georgia has been the dominant team, and Georgia has not really presented a typical Heisman candidate in the way that often it's like, well, who's going to win the Heisman? I don't know. The quarterback of the best team, the best player of the best team. And when you have a team like Georgia, and I think Michigan is very similar, where you have 12 really good players, but you don't have anybody who's going to be the first pick in the draft, right? That just makes it difficult sometimes. So those are our 5. We will announce the winner when the full season is over, like a normal organization would do. Heisman Trophy Trust. But now we're getting back on the field. When we come back, we're going to start looking ahead. We have 3 conference championship games that we're going to look at to some degree, and then 1 we're going to dig in on. We'll do all that next on Kings of the North. Time for some look-ahead games here on Kings of the North. We're going to start with the Mountain West Championship game, Landis. And this is kind of weird, and I want to talk about whether this is a cautionary tale at all, because we're getting UNLV and Boise State. But there was a 3-way tie at 6-2 in the Mountain West, and 2 of the teams did not play each other during the regular season. So as a result, they couldn't just go by head-to-head. Same thing would have applied if they all would have gone 1-1 against each other. And none of them are in the playoff rankings, so they couldn't lean on the playoff rankings, which some conferences have done in the past. So the Mountain West went back to the old BCS computers, and they used those 4 computers, and it wound up that San Jose State, who started off, they were 1-5, and they won their last 6 games, including beating UNLV last week to forge the tie. They got left out by the computers, and we wind up with UNLV Boise State in a world where we're not going to have divisions for conferences, where lots of teams aren't going to play each other. We are going to be, I had this conversation with a bunch of national people in the Michigan press box on Saturday. We might be in tiebreaker hell for multiple conference championship games starting next year. Is that a problem? Is this what we are seeing in the Mountain West a sign of a problem to come across the sport?
I mean, yeah, I think so. We probably need to get our best minds together and think about the best way forward with that. I don't know that I love going to the old BCS model to settle scores here and figure out who's going to play in conference championship games.
Computers.
People hate computers. I hate computers. I'm in favor of eliminating conference championship games now that we've gotten to this point with the expanded playoff. I don't really think we ever need a conference championship games, but I certainly don't think we need them now. But they're not going to go away because they're good TV inventory for this first weekend of December. But
plus, they're all called like the Dr. Pepper Championship.
Yeah,
what did Dr. Pepper do?
Yeah, I don't know. Go back to the lab and make more DP10. Stuff's delicious, by the way.
Advertise here. Take all your conference championship game money and pour it into Kings of the North.
Yeah, so yes, it does feel potentially problematic in a world where conferences are going to have 18 teams and not everyone's playing each other and there are no divisions. It could be messy.
Yeah, so like San Jose State was like kind of okay with it, but they're sort of like making the point of like, well, computers don't know everything. And again, I almost would be in favor of a conference like having its own version of a playoff committee that you name like a 13-member panel before the season and say, if we get into a tiebreaker scenario at the end of the year, these people are going to pick. But then, of course, those people would have like bags of poop thrown at their house and stuff after the fact. So, but I'd be on it. You want to be on it?
What about conference playoffs?
Just add an extra game, like play on Wednesday to figure out who's going to play on Saturday.
Like everyone just plays 10 games, and then you have conference playoffs to determine who goes to the conference championship, and then those determines who go to the actual playoff.
Oh, no, I love that. Right.
Yeah.
Like when you make your conference schedule, you only have like 7 games that are scheduled on the end of November, although it would screw up the Ohio State, Michigan. Now this is off-season pot.
Okay. All right.
Change the schedule.
Yeah.
Landis is changing the face. But like that's what they did like the COVID year, right? Then it's like you sort of wind up playing because then you could have teams at the end of the year like playing to make the bowl, like playing for bowls against similar teams. There's a lot there. They're not going to get there next year, though. They're just going to let computers figure it out.
Can't wait.
So let's talk about this game. I mean, this is wild. Boise State fired its coach, Andy Avalos, after they got to 5-5. They actually won a blowout game, and we're like, we're done.
They won 42-14 and then fired their coach.
And then they've won their last 2 games to get to this point, and now they're favored. They're favored by 2 or 2.5 in this game against UNLV. Boise State is 7-5. Credit to Ashton Genty, who leads the nation in yards from scrimmage. He actually missed 2.5 games, so he doesn't lead in total yards, but he's averaging 164.6 yards from scrimmage per game. Last week, when they beat Air Force to grab this seat, he ran for 100 and rushed for 100, was the first Boise State player to do that since 2016. So they've got a dude there, but this does speak to the expectation level at Boise State. Let's run through people who have coached Boise State. Dirk Cutter, remember him? He's been like a famous football guy. He had a 722 winning percentage at Boise State. Then Dan Hawkins, he was good, parlayed it into the Colorado job. He had an 828 winning percentage at Boise State. Chris Peterson, heard of him? He was 92-12. That's an 885 winning percentage at Boise State. Then Brian Harsin, who wound up at Auburn after a little stop at Arkansas State. He was 69-19. That's a 784 winning percentage. So again, previous 4 coaches winning percentage: 722, 828, 885, 784. Andy Avalos was 22-14. That was a 611 winning percentage, and it wasn't good enough because of the expectation level at Boise State. Because you know what Boise State's expectations are? This!
Yes.
Make the Mountain West Championship game. And they thought they weren't, so they fired preemptively. I actually wonder, are they going to go back to Brian Harsin, who flamed out at Auburn, but Billy be like, man, just come on back. Come home where you were great. Is that why they fired Andy Avalos, to get a jump on him?
That was my thought, although I don't know who else they'd be competing against to bring former disgraced Auburn coach Brian Harsin back to lead their program. So they probably could have waited if they wanted to. It's weird because like the winning percentage for Andy Avalos was not tremendous, but like last year they were good. Last year they won 10 games or were undefeated in the Mountain West until they lost the Mountain West Championship. And then it was like, we're going to miss the Mountain West Championship 2 times in 3 years. See you later, guy. And I was like, okay. It's like, all right.
And by the way, Air Force was the best team in the Mountain West, and then everybody on their offense got hurt. And they didn't win a game in November, I don't think. So, like, it's been a very weird year in the Mountain West. UNLV had a great year, credit to them, but they're in a warm climate, so we don't care about them. So
we might care about their offensive coordinator, Brennan Marion, if he is, perhaps drawing the attention of a school like Penn State, maybe.
Oh, interesting. Okay. We'll say that for the offseason. I just want Oregon State and Washington State to wind up in the Mountain West, and a year from now, if you're telling me that Oregon State, Washington State, Boise State, Air Force are all fighting to be the best team in the Mountain West and get one of the 12 playoff spots, like, I'm very here for that. Are you very here for that?
Yes, I'm. That version of a Mountain West excites me tremendously.
And so a version of the Mountain West that includes like Boise State back to being the best that they can be. That's why they did this. They didn't fire their coach because they were terrible. They fired their coach because they didn't feel like they were the best that they could be. But I don't know. You think Boise, I mean, has a team ever fired its coach and then won a conference championship game? You think Boise's going to win this? Saturday, 3 p.m. on Fox. You can watch this instead of the SEC championship game.
Yeah, I do think Boise is going to win this. I think it's the rushing attack that you mentioned. It's funny, like Ashton Genty. So every week we've done the show and I've gone through players to like include in the Knights/Kings of the North rankings. I always write down Ashton Genty because like Boise State has not been one of our 28 teams. But if you compare him statistically, like he's in the North and his stats are crazy. So like I always have on my list and I have to go back and change it because he's not actually in consideration. But he's a tremendous football player. But they also have George Holani, who's a really good running back. Taylon Green, their quarterback, is a good athlete. They have like kind of a 3-headed rushing attack there. And they're going up against a UNLV defense that has not been particularly good against the run lately. They've given up almost 600 rushing yards in their last 2 games. Well, a chunk of that is to Air Force, which only runs the ball, but they also gave up 233 rushing yards last week to San Jose State. I kind of just think Boise State runs all over UNLV and wins this game.
We might in the future get to the point where we have like 33 Northern teams plus anybody in the group of 5 who's good that year.
Yeah.
So we throw 4 Mountain West teams, the best team in the MAC, anybody else who's worth it.
I would like to do that because I don't want to stop talking about Oregon State and Washington State.
No, I don't want to either. It's been really fun to talk about them this year. So it is kind of nice. Like we're getting the Jonathan Smith part of it in the Big Ten at Michigan State. So we'll still talk about him. But I really like what Oregon State has done, as people can probably tell because I've been obsessed with them all year. They're the best 8-4 team in college football history. Anyway, game number 2 is the MAC Championship game. It is a rematch of Miami and Toledo, who played during the regular season. Toledo won on the road 21-17. Miami is 10-2. That was their only conference loss, was to Toledo. Toledo is 11-1, 8-0. The only loss is on like a last-second field goal at Illinois in their opener. This is Saturday at noon on ESPN. I would suggest people watch it because of our guy, man. I think I've told this story before, right? Toledo comes into Ohio Stadium last year and they just like fight. And it always bothers me when underdog teams come in and play a powerhouse and it feels like they're just trying to play to lose by 30 instead of lose by 50. And Toledo came in and fought, and they were led by DeQuan Finn, who was a quarterback who was like, I'm going down swinging, man. Mm-hmm. And I told DeQuan Finn that after the game because you've seen too many people come in and just almost feels like they just want to survive the game. And DeQuan Finn let it all hang out. He's 24-7 as a starter at Toledo. After that game a year ago, I know I was talking about it. People were talking about it. Man, there are Big Ten teams that should go try to get this guy to transfer. He did not leave. He stays at Toledo. He leads them to an 11-1 season. I love DeQuan Finn, Landis.
Yeah, so do I. He's a really just an entertaining football player, right? And I think we're going to be having the same conversations about him after this season. Like, is there perhaps a Big Ten team that might want to grab him, or really anyone across college football that's looking for a dynamic quarterback? I think is going to look at DeQuan Finn, and he was kind of the difference when these two teams played earlier in the season. He accounted for all 3 of Toledo's touchdowns in that game, 2 passing, 1 rushing. He's just really hard to handle. And you don't see quarterbacks, I think, like him in the MAC all that often. Like the MAC has had good quarterbacks, right? Like historically, there are guys that have come out of the MAC and gone on to the NFL and played very well. But in terms of being a dynamic athlete that is at that plays at like the level of a P5 quarterback, I don't know that you see that a whole lot in this league. But you're going to see it on Saturday with DeQuan Finn for sure.
Toledo tried to become the first back-to-back MAC champion since Northern Illinois. Did it in 2011 and 2012. Toledo beat Ohio in the MAC championship game 17-7 last year. So I think this should be a good one. And sometimes, like again, we're with no divisions. You're going to wind up in scenarios sometimes where you're just going to have maybe like some more rematches. So this is a rematch, but I think it's a good rematch, right? Like the visiting team won a close one previously. Miami's really good. Toledo's favored by 7.5. I don't know. I'm just rolling with DeQuan Finn, but you got a handle on this one?
Yeah, I'm inclined to roll with DeQuan Finn too. Like you're right. These are the 2 teams that I think have been the class of the MAC all year. So I'm glad that it worked out this way, that they're going to get to play again and decide this in Detroit for the championship. I think the combination of DeQuan Finn and like Penny Boone, who leads the MAC in rushing, he was at Maryland, like he's a former Power 5 guy who's from Detroit, I believe. I think he's a Detroit Martin Luther King guy, if I'm not mistaken. Is at Toledo now and is having a really productive season. So that's the thing with Toledo. Like Toledo has the best resources in the MAC, and often because of that has the best roster in the MAC, and it can get like P5 transfer downs like Penny Boone to help spearhead their offense. So it's just hard to overcome. Miami's very good. I think Chuck Martin is one of the more underrated coaches in college football. I wouldn't mind seeing maybe like an Indiana go grab Chuck Martin, to be honest. I think that might be a decent hire for them. And Miami's good on defense. They really get after the quarterback, but when these 2 teams played the last time earlier this year, they only got to DeQuan Finn and sacked them 1 time. So if that's all they're going to be able to muster again, I just see it being a hard path to victory here for Miami.
You think Jason Candle leaves Toledo for a bigger job after this season?
I could see it. I would be hesitant on it, like for the reasons I mentioned when we were talking about the Syracuse job, right? Guy who wins a lot at the place that has better resources than everybody else in the league. I think that's it's a very specific type of hire for a very specific type of program. I don't know if I'm a Power 5 program that is operating with less and trying to get by and trying to find edges and I don't know if that's the guy I'm hiring. I don't like. I think I'd rather be like a more established program to let him live in a similar existence.
I mean, it worked for Iowa State and Matt Campbell, right? Who's the guy Jason Campbell took over for at Toledo.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. Done a good job. Congratulations, Toledo, on a great year. Man, it would have been awesome if they would have beaten Illinois and they were 12-0, but this is still going to be a good game worth your time. Last one we're going to look at is what's the one? It's Michigan, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
So we did this 2 years ago, and Michigan beat Iowa in the Big Ten Championship game 42-3. It is interesting that the Big Ten Championship game had kind of been an Ohio State-Wisconsin thing, and now it's kind of a Michigan-Iowa thing, because it would have been Michigan-Iowa last year also if Iowa didn't get upset by Nebraska in the last game of the regular season. So last year was Michigan-Purdue. Now it's Michigan-Iowa again. It's like a 4-touchdown line. Cooper DeJean is out for the year. There are still great defensive players on Iowa, Sebastian Castro and Jay Higgins and Joe Evans, and Phil Parker is one of. This is actually a good showdown because it's Phil Parker, the Iowa defensive coordinator, Sharon Moore, the Michigan offensive coordinator we've talked about, are 2 of the 5 finalists for the Broyles Award as the best assistants in college football. Mike Bobo from Georgia's in there, but he's just keeping going what Todd Monken did at Georgia. I think they're the 2 best candidates. I think either Phil Parker or Sharon Moore should win the Broyles Award as the best assistant. I think Sharon Moore will win, but that's a great showdown, man, because these 2 guys lead their side of the ball as well as anybody in college football.
I thought when I saw the finalists come out, I thought, and I almost tweeted it and didn't do it. I think it has to be Phil Parker to get he is the reason that Iowa is 10-2, right? It is remarkable that Iowa has gotten to this point with how bad they are on offense, and Phil Parker has gotten his side of the ball ready to rock every week and gotten Iowa to this point. Sharon Moore is certainly a compelling candidate, but if I had a vote, I'd be giving it to Phil Parker. And I think the Iowa defense here is in an interesting spot, right? It's been good all year. It's what's the most it's given up is the 31 it gave up to Penn State. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that was not we're going to bot but that wasn't a moving the ball up and down the field on you kind of 31. That was the 31 that Penn State had to work for. A Michigan offense that has not been super dynamic this year, coming off of a really physical game against Ohio State, now down its best offensive lineman and having to reshuffle up front. I could see Iowa's defense giving Michigan all can handle in this game.
I think I can't see that.
Really?
Because that 31-0 versus Penn State, when you think about the teams that they have been playing and beating since then, they have not played a competent offense. What's I don't know that Iowa has played a competent offense all year.
Illinois.
I love Isaiah Williams. I don't know. I think Michigan's significant. We've talked about Michigan and what a machine they are on offense and their success rate. That kind of, I do think, especially with Cooper DeJean out, right? They're not at full strength. Yeah. I think it's possible that Michigan kind of wears them down and marches up and down the field, and that Michigan's defense is so good that, as inept as the Iowa offense has continued to be, mostly because of Brian Ferentz, but also because of just devastating injury after devastating injury, I think it just might be 3 and out after 3 and out after 3 and out. And at some point, the Iowa defense wears down and it's 14-0 at halftime and it's 28-0 at the end of the third quarter. And it winds up being 38-0. And it's not 50, but it is just okay. That was just Michigan doing its thing. Actually, that's my predicted final score is Michigan 38, Iowa 0.
Yeah, I mean it's out there. I can't really disagree with any of that. And the thing with Iowa is they're not going to score, so we probably come away feeling, or it's probably difficult to come away feeling like Iowa's offense or defense did much of anything when they still might lose 20 between 24 and 35 to nothing. It's well, what actually gets you excited about that? I don't know that I saw enough from Michigan's offense over this last month to make me think they're just suddenly going to go out there and put it on Iowa. Yeah. So I think Michigan's number is fairly low in this game. I think they still win, and probably even cover the 23. I think my thought is 28-0. Okay. But I think holding Michigan's offense to 4 touchdowns if you're Iowa's defense is a nice performance out of Iowa. It's just they get no help from the other side of the ball.
Reminder that when these teams played 2 years ago in the Big Ten Championship game, in the first quarter, Blake Corum had a 67-yard touchdown run, and Donovan Edwards threw a 75-yard touchdown to Roman Wilson. So, like in this version of Michigan football, the last couple of years, like they've been bringing it against Big Ten foes, right? They didn't get it done against TCU in the semifinal. They were outclassed by Georgia in the semifinal 2 years ago, but like against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, they've been like, yeah, we're here to do our thing. So I think you're going to get a version of that. That, again, is Saturday at 8 p.m. on Fox. I know there are people who are just in chaos mode and that are like, what if Iowa beats Michigan? What are you going to do? What would the playoff?
I mean, what's that look like? 3 pick sixes for Iowa? Like yeah.
We have not really gotten to like the supreme chaos mode ever in... I mean, the biggest one probably was almost like last year where TCU is an undefeated team in the Big 12, loses the conference championship game, but makes the playoff anyway, right? But like we have not had the thing where a huge favorite that's going to make the playoff for sure is favored by 4 scores and loses in the conference championship game. And then like, what do you do? Mm-hmm. So which means that doesn't make me want to talk about it. It makes me say, why are we talking about it? Because it's not going to happen.
Right. And also, as people who are based in Columbus, Ohio, I don't want to be around Ohio State fans if Iowa ends up beating Michigan because they're going to burn the city to the ground.
No, and that's the thing. And I don't want, people were always making jokes. Our friend Tyler Shoemaker was like, Kirk Ferentz is going to drive to my house and be like, how do you like that, Doug? If Iowa beats Michigan. So, which should be fine. Because I was already right. Because they fired the guy.
That's right.
I said, I just said, don't hire your kid. He should be fired. And that was correct. Regardless of the 10 wins, that was still correct. All right. When we come back, the big one of the weekend, Washington versus Oregon. We'll do that next in our look ahead focus on Kings of the North. Time now for our look ahead focus on Kings of the North. It is the Pac-12 Championship game. It's on Friday night. If you are a person who is like kind of new to this show and maybe hadn't thought about Northern football the same way. And it's like, I'm just really like a Notre Dame fan or a Penn State fan or a Michigan fan or whatever. But, I guess Doug and Bill are trying me to get me to care about Washington. It's Friday night. Don't wait. Be like, I guess, no, I am excited for that. It's pretty good. It's Saturday morning. When's that game on today? It's on Friday night, 8 p.m. on ABC. Set a timer on your phone. Because this should be really good, but I'm a little surprised, Landis. It's like a 9.5, 10-point line, and I think it's just because everybody thinks the wrong team won the first time. So Washington won this head-to-head battle like 6 weeks ago. Since then, they've each played 6 games. Washington has won its 6 games since beating Oregon by a total of 39 points. They've won by 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Oregon has won its 6 games by a total of 156 points. Mm-hmm. They've won by 9, 14, 24, 29, 36, and 44. And 5 of those 6 opponents are the same.
Yes.
Landis.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
Yeah. I did the same math that you did. I didn't total them, I just averaged them. So it's 32-25 for Washington is the average score, and 42-16 is the average score for Oregon. Drastically different. The 2 teams I think have gone in opposite directions, I think, very clearly since that game was played. I don't know that I came away from the first matchup thinking that the wrong team won, right? I just thought it was like a competitive game. Oregon played it. Both teams actually played it fairly aggressively. And Oregon played it ultra aggressively at the end of the game and kind of didn't live to tell about it. And that was sort of the way the game went, but it was a little back and forth. Washington's offense stalled out a little bit in the second half and Oregon kind of took over and stole some momentum and couldn't quite finish it off. But I didn't think like, Oregon whipped Washington up and down the field. I can't believe they lost that game. But the way they played since then, I totally understand why this is more than a touchdown spread.
So both these teams are excellent offensively. They are just up there among the best offensive teams in the country. By the FEI offensive rating, Oregon is 2nd and Washington is 5th. Looking at success rate, running the ball, Oregon's 2nd, Washington's 4th. Passing the ball, Oregon's 1st, Washington's 6th. They both just really are tremendous offenses. I think Oregon's probably a little more balanced, although Dylan Johnson's been running the ball well for Washington as of late. Bucky Irving, the Oregon running back, we've talked about him all year. He is, as a dual threat, just an incredible player. Do you think either offense has like a clear advantage here, Landis? And we've talked about it a lot. Bo Nix just throws shorter passes. Michael Penix throws longer passes. And that's just stylistic with the way the games are called and the way the offenses work more than anything else. Do you think one is definitively better than the other right now?
I think Oregon's is better right now. It's the balance. It's my belief that Oregon, I think, can win a couple of different styles of game depending on how things go. I don't know that Washington can. I know they've run the ball okay. I'm actually surprised their rushing success rate is so good and it's the USC game for Washington skews it, right? Because they ran the ball over USC. But I wanted to look it up like before we started talking about this game, because in my mind I was thinking like Washington is almost a different offense now. They're running it more. They're running it more effectively. It's not actually the case. In the 5 games before they played Oregon, Washington was averaging 26 carries per game for 123 yards. And in the 6 games since it's played Oregon, Washington is 28 carries for 126 yards. So it's like 2 more carries and 3 more yards per game. It's not really a gigantic difference there from how they were running the ball in the beginning of the year. So I just think Oregon is a more reliable rushing attack. And while the passing attacks are different, I still think like Oregon does a lot of short stuff, but they can get you downfield. And Washington's got some injury stuff too, right? They've not really had their full complement of receivers for the entire year. Like Rome Odunze's been there and he's been a stud. Jalen Polk, the last 2 games, doesn't have a catch. He's got 10 targets and no receptions. And Jalen McMillan's like been in and out of the lineup all year. And he finally did get on the board with some receptions in the Apple Cup last week. But prior to that, he hadn't had one since September 16th. When he was like in and out of games and not playing a whole lot. So like Michael Penix has kind of had to do it with sort of only Rome Odunze at times. Meanwhile, Bo Nix has kind of had his full complement of weapons available to him, and others have emerged here in the back half of the year as well. So I just think Oregon's better positioned.
It does feel a little bit like to me with Washington's health. And again, Jalen McMillan has played he's played like 30 snaps each of the last 2 weeks. It's similar, I think, to like what Ohio State went through with Emeka Egbuka of like he's hurt, and then we want to get him back and get him on the field because we want him to hopefully be at his best when it really matters. For Ohio State, that was the Michigan game. For Washington, it's this game. So if like there's a part of me that wonders, I mean, now it's not like a strategy because like they almost lost. This is not, they beat Oregon State 22-20. They had to get they didn't score an offensive touchdown against Arizona State. This has not just been like, okay, they're playing it close to the vest. This has been like, is Washington going to lose? Like, I think everybody in college football, like 4 times in the last month and a half, you've looked at a score of a Washington and been like, oh, today's the day. And then they've survived. So it's not a plan. But there's a part of me that wonders, like, if they just kind of knew they had some injuries and they sort of entered, like, maybe defenses are figuring us out. Maybe we're a little injured. We're in survival mode, and then we'll get back to being ourselves on Friday night against Oregon. But also maybe that's a bunch of excuse making for a team that hasn't looked that good.
Yeah, I think that's right. One other thing to consider with Washington, like they've done an interesting thing here with Giles Jackson, their receiver who was at Michigan earlier in his career, and I think he got hurt. I think he got hurt and missed time, and then it got to the point where they like tried to finesse it and see if they could redshirt him and preserve this year of eligibility while still have him available to play. So he has not played the last couple of weeks. Or he didn't play last week again in the Apple Cup, so he's only appeared in 4 games, but now he can play, and it won't impact his eligibility moving forward. It's like a new rule change in college football. Postseason play, which includes conference championship weekend, does not actually count towards your eligibility if you're trying to redshirt. So like they'll have him available, and maybe that adds a little something. You know, he's not a super productive player, but he's pretty dynamic, and maybe there's stuff for him that they haven't shown a whole lot of that they can get to in this game against Oregon. So it's not like the cupboard's completely bare for Washington. It's just that if you compare like the health of the 2 offenses and like available weapons, I think Oregon comes out looking much better coming into this game.
Defensively, it feels like the difference here is that Washington does not stop the run very effectively. And that like Washington's okay against the pass. Oregon's like a better defense, but it's specifically that when it comes to rushing defense, that's the biggest, I think, difference between these two teams. And so that, like, could that be it? That this is sort of Bo Nix's Heisman showcase for Oregon, but might it wind up being Landis that Oregon like tries to run the ball down Washington's throat?
Yeah, I could see it. Although Oregon didn't run it a ton, I don't think, on Washington when they played the first time, did they? I can't remember exactly what it was, but yes, that is something that I guess worries me a little bit in this game. Is I just kind of think Oregon might be able to control Washington in the trenches. Like if it gets into a drop back pass game, then you get like Braylon Trace out there who's been playing like a maniac the last few weeks, and maybe he becomes a disruptive force in this game for Washington. But if Oregon is able to just sort of like run its offense and like be on schedule and run the ball whenever it wants to, or whatever it makes sense to, then I do think that's an advantage here, because the pass defenses on both sides are pretty good. I also I tend to think that doesn't matter a whole lot when you're playing offenses like this. I think both teams are going to be able to throw the ball quite well and probably do mostly what they want to do that way. And then that makes me think like the ability to run the ball become a little bit of an X factor in this game. And I trust Oregon's ability to do that against Washington's defense than I do Washington's against Oregon's defense.
First game, Oregon ran it 40 times for 204 yards, 5.1 yard average.
Okay,
Bucky Irving, 22 for 127. Jordan James, 11 for 63. And they have been like a pretty good 1-2 punch here for Oregon. So again, that like the first game, Nix and Penix both threw for 300 plus. Oregon ran for 200. Washington only ran for 100, but like Oregon didn't win. Like Washington found a way to win. Jalen McMillan, again, as we talked about, did not play in the first Oregon game. So again, if Washington can get back to sort of like full health, I mean, in the end, by the FEI ratings, Oregon's defense is 15th. Washington's is 33rd. So we see, I think, that defensive advantage in one area for Oregon. Or we're saying like, oh, it might just be the right. Is it like best quarterback wins? Because Nix and Penix are both in the thick of the Heisman race. Nix more so than Penix, but I do think the winning. I don't think the losing team's quarterback can win the Heisman. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. Yep.
And I think the winning team's quarterback potentially has a very good chance to win the Heisman.
I think if it's Bo Nix, he's going to win the Heisman. I think Michael Penix could still have more of an uphill statistical battle against like Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
And perhaps even Bo Nix. Like if they both ball out in this game, I think Bo Nix could still finish ahead of Michael Penix.
Bo Nix is minus 165 in the Heisman odds. Penix is about 16-1 in the middle of the season. Penix was the favorite for a while there. He was at minus odds. Again, Nix just a much higher completion percentage because of this type of offense they run. Both of basically, they're within 7 yards of each other. 39.06 for Nix, 38.99 for Penix. That Nix has only thrown 2 picks is pretty remarkable because he has been attacking down the field at times. We saw the throw right before the end of the half against Oregon State last week to Troy Franklin, where he's going to make a play and they get an extra touchdown that they probably shouldn't have gotten, and then they're off to the races against Oregon State. Like 37-2 is a ridiculous touchdown to interception ratio, even if you're only having an average depth of target of like 7 yards. And Penix has thrown 8 picks, Landis. So I still think Michael Penix is great, but Bo Nix has been a machine for, I think, since that loss. He's been like locked in.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the finalists for the King of the North. Since that game, Bo Nix, 78% completion rate, over 2,000 yards passing, almost 11 yards per attempt, 20 touchdowns, 1 interception, 25 total touchdowns. Michael Penix, 59% completions, 1,500 yards, almost 1,600 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt. So it's like almost 4 yards per attempt worse than Bo Nix. Only 12 touchdowns compared to Bo Nix's 20, 3 picks compared to Bo Nix's 1, and 15 total touchdowns compared to Bo Nix's 25. So like, yeah, Bo Nix has been on a rocket ship since that game, and Michael Penix has come back to earth a little bit.
Yeah. There's no doubt that Oregon has played better than Washington since they played. To me, that's not a guarantee that Oregon will play better on Friday night. I still think it's possible that there is a best version of Washington that has been in hibernation a little bit. And we haven't mentioned the 2 coaches in this game. And I'm not going to say it because I don't want us to talk this way. So we're laying out what Kings of the North is all about. I don't want to say something like Dan Lanning has Oregon playing like a Southern team, because that's not the point, right? But like, Oregon is very aggressive. They get after it. I talked so much in the beginning of the year, it felt like Washington's offense was just like on the attack, relentless, an assault almost, right? Like, they don't let you breathe. And it's like the last 6 weeks, it feels like Oregon on both sides of the ball has been like that. Like, Dan Lanning is just a very aggressive, kind of in your face kind of coach, and Oregon is playing that way. So they are reflecting their coach. And it's not as much of a trend lately, but there was a time when second-year coaches were winning national titles like crazy, man, right? Like Urban Meyer at Florida was a second year. Les Miles at LSU was a second year. Jim Tressel at Ohio State was a second year. That was a thing of like, hey, inherit a program that actually has some talent and then be the coach that gets them over the top. Like, Dan Lanning might be on this path because like Oregon is getting after it. And it feels more like Kalen DeBoer at Washington, a lot of similarities, but I think Kalen DeBoer to me is more like sort of holding his team together and finding ways to win when they're not at their best. That like Lanning is like leading the attack and DeBoer is like managing the issues. And even the play they ran at the end of the Apple Cup on a fourth down little like option flip to Rome Odunze, that was like, holy moly, like in a big time game to win, like that's what you're doing. Kalen DeBoer has managed to hold it together, where it would have been very easy for Washington to have taken a loss, and they haven't. But credit to both these guys for getting it done.
Yeah, I think both are strong candidates for National Coach of the Year, right? Maybe this game might decide who wins that ultimately. They both done a tremendous job in different ways, but I think both have been effective and impressive. And you're right, it's that. I also don't want to speak about Dan Lanning in those terms of like bringing the South to Oregon, but I think we'd be being disingenuous if we didn't acknowledge there was an element of that, both in their style of play and the way he builds that roster, and it's worked for Oregon, and I think it will continue to work for Oregon. How do you think 0 for 3 on fourth down in that game, including at the end, giving Washington a chance to win the game, and also at the end of the first half, not taking a field goal that obviously would have been important for Oregon? How do you think that might influence Dan Lanning's decision-making in this game?
I think he doubles down. Yeah. I think he thinks to himself, I'm going to keep doing what I do. It didn't work the first time, which means it will work the second time. What do you think?
I think you're right, because I think Dan Lanning is among many things, he's aware of the conversation around that too, right? And I think he'll want to probably prove himself right in the long run by doing that. It is interesting to me. I was just checking this as you were talking, and now like game state matters here. I'm not pretending like it's apples to apples. Through the Washington game, Oregon went for it on fourth down 13 times in 6 games. In the 6 games since, it's gone for it on fourth down only 8 times. So, but it did go for it on fourth down 4 times against Arizona State. So, yeah, maybe it's who they are.
It's a great position for these two programs to be in. Kalen DeBoer is 23-2 in his 2 years at Washington. Dan Lanning is 21-4 in his 2 years at Oregon, and they are both coming to the Big Ten next year. So they won't be coming with their quarterbacks, but they're going to be coming with like real programs. This is not. We agree on that. This is not like, hey, they got some good quarterbacks in the portal and, peaked, and now they're going to fall back to earth. Like, do you think both these programs, both these head coaches are like building something, even if there might be a little bit of a step back if they have to replace Bo Nix and Michael Penix? But how real do you think this is going to be for Oregon and Washington when they get to the Big Ten?
I think Oregon's very real because they're recruiting well. Washington, I do think Washington is a little more reliant on like absolutely nailing it at quarterback. So it's hard. Like I don't know what they're going to do after Michael Penix leaves. So I have a little more questions about Washington long term than I do Oregon. But I think both are coming to the Big Ten next year at worst as like top 6 teams in the league, right? Top 5 teams in the league. Like the big 3 that exist already, and then these two come in. And if you want to tell me that Washington and Oregon are better positioned than Penn State, I might listen to you.
I think that Michael Pratt, the Tulane quarterback, has to be in the Big Ten next year.
Michael Pratt and maybe Riley Leonard, the Duke quarterback, if he doesn't go to the NFL.
And Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback. I mean, like, there's just
Yeah.
like, if you tell me like Michael Pratt's Washington's quarterback next year, right? I think like Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, maybe Ohio State. Like, I think there are many options for some dudes, and like that's how this happened, right? Like Northern teams, like, you have to be willing and able to do this when guys become available, and it's just barely started. Pratt's not officially in the portal yet, but I think a lot of people have speculated that he's a 4-year starter at Tulane, that he might do a 1-year leap like that, like Sam Hartman did from Wake Forest to Notre Dame. So, yeah, I think these teams will find a way to keep it going. I don't disagree with you, but I also think like Washington probably will find an instant answer. Because when you want to go play on that offense,
right? Yeah, it's not a hard sell to get a quarterback. I don't think. Yeah.
All right, so that is it for this version.
Do we pick a winner?
What?
We didn't pick a winner.
Well, you can tell. So we both picked Michigan. We both picked Toledo, and we both picked Boise State.
Mm-hmm.
You have Oregon in the playoff.
Oh, right.
I have Washington in the playoff.
Right.
How strongly do you feel about your Oregon pick?
Like an 8 out of 10.
Yeah. I feel like I'm maybe throwing pixie dust on this thing. I think it's kind of cool. I like when Washington just throws 3 30-yard passes down the field every set of downs and figures I'll go 1 for 3 and move the chains. And I'm kind of like, I like that kind of football. So
yeah,
kind of hasn't worked for 6 weeks, but who knows? It gives them a puncher's chance all the time. And if they can somehow get their receiver room and if they can get all their skill guys like kind of back to normal, then I think they have a chance to be Washington again. So I wouldn't bet my house on it, but I definitely would take Washington with the points.
Yeah, and they're playing indoors in Vegas, so like it could be a little bit of a track meet, like which I think would maybe not favor Washington, but give Washington, I think, a better chance of winning than otherwise. Are
they playing in the stadium that has like the stuff on the outside of it? Do they play the Sphere?
No, they're playing at the stadium that has like the eternal flame for Al Davis on the concourse somewhere.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's also where the Mountain West Championship is being played because UNLV is hosting.
Nice.
Do you think they should do a doubleheader? I said this the other day because I was talking to Matt Fortuna and Stu Mandel because they're both going out there. I guess there's a Hall of Fame thing, and then they're going to the Pac-12 Championship. And I said the Mountain West and Pac-12 should just do a doubleheader in Vegas every year for their conference championship game.
Are you going to leave us to go work for the Las Vegas Convention Bureau and pitch that idea? It's a great idea. Maybe. And you could sell separate tickets, right? Or you could give people the option of like, we'll give you a little off if you buy both. Well,
the part of the issue, because Mountain West plays at a home site because they don't think they'll be able to sell out a neutral site. But you could, if you did it that way. Right? Yeah. You could also do the same thing with the Big Ten and the MAC.
Yeah. We're changing the face of college football. Every week on this show, we make this sport even better. That's our pledge to you. We're coming back next Sunday, immediately after the playoff rankings are released. Is that correct? We're planning to do that? You're good? We're all good with that?
That is the plan, yeah.
All right. Might even be live on our YouTube channel, potentially. So we immediately, as soon as those playoff rankings are discussed, are unveiled on Sunday afternoon, early Sunday afternoon, come find us. So it'll be in your it'll be in a podcast feed on our podcast feed that is the podcast feed, but mostly you want to find us on our YouTube channel, the Kings of the North YouTube channel, because we might even be going live there. And so we're going to react immediately. And then I want us to play what would a 12-team playoff look like on next Monday, a week from now, because we're going to get a sense of like what the 12-team playoff is going to be like for the North, how many teams we expect to make it every year, what the goal should be. And we'll use this year, Landis, as a jumping off point for that.
Love it.
All right. Thanks so much to you guys for making us part of your week here, talking about Northern college football. Enjoy these conference championship games this weekend. We'll see you back here on Sunday. For now, for Mike Yorostowski, our producer who makes us sound good and look good, build all these millions of graphics. Thanks to Mike for that. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.